If you were to ask me at the start of 2022 what I thought the game of the year for 2023 would be, I probably would have said, well, there's that new Final Fantasy coming out, that looks pretty good. There's the long-awaited sequel to Breath of the Wild, and there's that new thing Bethesda's working on. Starfield, was it? But I wouldn't for a second, as most people probably wouldn't have, said Baldur's Gate 3. At the end of May, it looked like the lads over at Nintendo had safely secured Game of the Year. Or so we all thought. Fast forward to August 2023 and you can find very few people who don't believe that Baldur's Gate 3 is 2023's Game of the Year. It's not only masterfully adapted the concepts of the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop into a video game format, but it also provides a level of depth, scope, and choice that rivals that of its counterpart. It reshapes and redefines what an RPG can be when pushed to its absolute limits. The game's sheer amount of choice and branching narratives are a marvel, not only through the use of character classes, proficiencies, and stats, all the typical stuff that we come to expect if you're a D&D player or even just someone who's played many RPGs, but it is the number of these abilities and the ways that these can impact the broader world, whether it's characters, or the player, or even the environment. The way that you can interact with this world is entirely robust and unique and has its own set of outcomes. Baldur's Gate feels like a wholly unique experience, whether you're playing on your 4th, 5th, or 1st character, whether you're playing by yourself or with friends. There is so many different options and ways to approach a situation that come with the real important part here: impact, consequences, and outcomes that are very varied based on the choices you've made. And it feels like Larian have accounted for almost all instances that a player could think of, rewarding a player with a unique outcome for thinking outside the box or playing to a certain sort of character. This game is really a definitive experience that encapsulates what playing D&D could be like. Whether you're playing with your friends or by yourself, it unfolds and tells a narrative that is wholly replayable many times over, with so many different ways to experience this game. And just when you think you've seen it all and you're ready to move on, you'll see that there is something else just hidden there, or something else when you talk to a friend that they've found. There is just so much packed into this game, and honestly, this game is lightning in the bottle. An opus, it's just a fucking masterpiece to play, and I highly recommend that anyone who is remotely interested in RPGs checks this one out, because simply put, Baldur's Gate 3 is a masterfully made RPG that shows what the genre has to offer when it's at its absolute peak, but it is accessible to newcomers whilst not compromising what the heights and depth of this genre can offer. So without further ado, let's get into my review of Baldur's Gate 3. A game like Baldur's Gate is a rarity in this day and age for how grand it is in size and scope, with each of the 3 significant acts feeling uniquely distinct, as if they were their own separate game, and in many ways they are. Baldur's Gate's 3-act structure feels like I'm watching an epic, a trilogy similar to something like Lord of the Rings, where each act is very distinct in its tone, setting, and character development. It really unfolds and develops in a way that fleshes out the world of the Sword Coast and introduces new characters, whilst giving plenty of room for each of the existing characters to breathe. Lord of the Rings is a fantastic comparison here for Baldur's Gate, not because they're both set in a fantasy setting, but more because they both occupy this long, extensive universe and have really excessive runtimes for the medium that they occupy. And not only that, but a wealth of sub-stories and subplots that are running in conjunction with a main story, being the more important thing here. Baldur's Gate's narrative, regardless of the choices that you make, feel like it has a history, a world constructed that weaves itself into this broader overarching story. Many of the different sub-characters here all feel fleshed out, all feel like they have their place and presence within this world, and are other threads that tie to this broader story. What Larian has accomplished here is a remarkable feat. Every one of these companions matters. Everything in this world matters, from the side quests, the side stories, the little things that you uncover. Everything kind of threads its way back into this overarching story through one big key driver, and that is the player's choice. I was continuously conscious of the actions I would take throughout my journey and the repercussions that this would have. The side stories and quests do not feel gamified in how you stumble upon them, but more authentically stumbled upon, based on how you react and how this world can play out. There are several ways that can make this experience feel unique and organic. The rewards of doing these quests as well have many knock-on variables that alter and shift what the story is here. From the moment you first enter your character customization, you'll be greeted with a few different ways to create your character. There's the origin story characters, which can be your companions if you choose to make a custom character. Then there is of course a custom character who has their own backstory and class, which that class will come with its own set of skills and spells and stuff like that can help alter how you approach different situations, and different stats that can help you play and roleplay as a different type of character. The last type of character you can make is a sort of custom character in a way that has their own story, referred to as the Dark Urge. This is a unique and different experience to the custom character and the origin story character, and does provide a fresh air to the Baldur's Gate experience, and is another way to experience the game once you've completed it as a custom character. So Larian have stated as well that this is something you should probably experience as your second playthrough, but if you want to go in as your first, you're welcome, more than welcome to. Every experience is going to be unique. From the moment that you start in that prologue to seeing the credits roll, you will see that there is many different choices here that can play out, and there is so many things that you will not see on your first playthrough. And I think that's the beauty of this game in a lot of ways, is just not seeing everything in your first playthrough and having like the idea in your head of, I wonder all the other ways that this could have went, and then having your adventure just play out, and this sense of wonder that anything is really possible. It really is just a great way to think when playing this game. It's your unique story that's unfolding, and it really does incentivize you to get into this headspace of thinking outside the box and playing to how you want to see things turn out, and striving for a certain type of experience, and letting the dice take control and navigate you through this monolith of an experience. It really is just crazy, and I think that it just speaks volumes to just how this story unfolds here, and just how well crafted it all is. Throughout these acts, you'll see so many things unfold from its main stories and side stories, and I think it's just something so special with Baldur's Gate is how they were able to take many of these characters, the tone, the overall theme of many of these different places, and the side characters, and have this all neatly so packaged into this experience. It is so easy to get lost and enthralled. And I think that is something that Baldur's Gate does exceptionally well. I think one of the key things about this game that makes it so substantial to me and so impactful is the stories that unfold here. I feel like half the time I'm doing these quests, and it's not for a gamey reason like trying to get a reward at the end, or trying to just, complete a quest to level up or get XP, or any of these gamified reasons that you may play in another game. But a lot of the time it really is just to see how this little story and this little thread unfolds, and where it really leads you down this rabbit hole. Because I think Baldur's Gate does a really good job at not holding your hand in a sense of like, telling you what to do, but in kind of guiding you all the way through this world and eventually looping you back to the main path. It helps and lets you walk along the lines of seeing all the different little paths and avenues that the side stories can take you, and it neatly then redirects you back to the main story in a way that doesn't feel forced, or doesn't feel like it's trying to push you, but ties up these threads that all eventually loop back into one big major theme and major part of the game. And I feel like that is just something that the game really excels at. The storyboarding and writing for many of these different quests as well is just so fantastic, and they can just play out in so many different ways. And I really don't want to dive into the particular finer details here, because I really want to keep it a bit obscure, because I think going in and not knowing a lot about what unfolds here is half of the beauty, because just letting the game play for itself and take you on this adventure is really half the magic of it. I think that the biggest thing that Baldur's Gate is able to accomplish endlessly is the aspect of choice, and having this choose your own adventure in a way that feels impactful and makes these mutations and threads of your different choices feel relevant throughout the whole experience. I found myself with things that I've done in Act 1 come back twofold in Act 2 and tenfold in Act 3. The more I did certain things, the more I would see those things kind of shine or now, be looked upon poorly depending on what I did in the world. And it had long-lasting impacts and rewards in a sense later on in the game, not through items, but through different other story beats that would otherwise be available if I'd done things a different way. There is always a choice, and Baldur's Gate really does let you be the person who decides, and I think that this is one of the things that makes its storytelling so masterful, because Larian has accounted for everything in this game, and it feels like they reward you endlessly for all the different choices you make and make you think of all the different ways that you could possibly approach situations. Its storytelling is a way of having the player think and be engaged constantly in the game. It isn't just a long cutscene that plays out all the time, it's always a way to elevate and transform the story to the way the player wants to play, and I love it for that. Now, with that being said, I want to get into the writing and the characters because they are simply phenomenal. Let's get into it. If there is one aspect that Baldur's Gate never fails to deliver on, it is the writing. All of these characters feel so believable and incredibly well written. They're all multifaceted and paint a vivid picture of what they're about early on into the story. Every one of your companions you encounter feels finely detailed with their morals and principles, which coincide with their rich backstories that eloquently evolve throughout your playthrough. One thing that makes these characters feel so special is the influence that you, the player, have with these companions through exploring and developing these relationships with them. It can shape your experience and their experience for better or worse, depending on the type of person you are or playing as and how you interact with them. To me, there's a particular beauty in that. It makes your experience, your choices, and the way that you develop these friendships or relationships with these characters into something bigger and more, and really does harken back to this core theme of this video and, well, Baldur's Gate, and that is the impact of choice. I can't stress enough how compelling each of these companions are and the stories that unfold in Baldur's Gate. The fact that some are easily missed throughout your travels or the stories can just be skippable for some of these characters shows a level of confidence that Larian had in the writing of these characters and the kind of stock that they put in these critical characters that kind of can't be missed. And I do think that it just provides a level of being able to let the player choose and this philosophy of letting them pick the things that they want to engage with. And it also does provide a level of replayability. I mean, for example, you might have just skipped out on a character the first time around, but you really want to see their story full all the way the second time around, so you fully invest in them. There's a lot there. It's common with these games that run for over 50 hours that the story and the characters, they tend to lose a bit of steam at times. You get to a point, you're like, okay, where's this going? I'm a bit burnt out. But here in Baldur's Gate, you and your companions are as equal main characters as one another, and their journeys, progressions, and outcomes are just as enticing as your own. And I think there is also something that can be said for how Baldur's Gate handles romantic relationships. I just feel throughout the whole story, these characters are developing and evolving just like you, and they feel as much a main character as you are. It feels like there is a common thing with games where these relationships with these characters, especially ones that you want to romance, there's like a few hoops you jump through and tick boxes, and then you have a certain little sequence play out and it's like, yippee, you're together. And then it just kind of ties up there. But I think there's a good kind of thematic thing with Baldur's Gate where they have this relationship evolve along with the character arc for these characters, and it feels like a lot of these romantic relationships and the things that unfold there really do elevate the story and the relationship with that particular character. It's like you've put in work to get with them, and their romance sequence is also a sense of connection between the player's character and their character, and it really is done in a tactful way that doesn't just feel like some mindless sex scene that is just taking place because action, violence, and sex all sell or something. It really is a great scene, and I think that Larian have done a good job with this type of stuff. There's that infamous druid bear romance scene that we've all seen that blew up on the internet, and there's also a lot more impactful and meaningful scenes that unfold that really do tie well into a lot of these characters, and I think provide a little different way of looking at them and their relationship with you, the main character, if you choose to pursue them that way. But I think removing that and even just getting to understand many of these different main characters, even the side characters, there is a lot there to love about these characters, and they feel really believable, really likable, or some of them just feel like outright assholes, and that's also good too. There is so many different ways to look at the characters of this world and how they are written, and it's so fascinating, and it is just it really gets you enthralled in the world early on and doesn't lose steam even late into the game. So there you have it. To tie everything into a neat package, I think the story, the characters, and everything from that lens, Baldur's Gate executes very well. I think that the first 2 acts in particular are insanely strong, and I think the 3rd act is pretty decent as well, and overall the story is fairly great. I don't want to go into too many story elements because I don't want to spoil the game itself. I think that's something that you should just jump in and enjoy. If you're still on the fence about Baldur's Gate, I mean, after all the awards and everything that it's been getting praised, I'm just going to be another voice that's saying, yes, it's incredible and it has a great story and it's definitely worth playing. But now we're going to be talking about the gameplay and moving on to that. So let's get into what systems make Baldur's Gate so goddamn incredible. Baldur's Gate 3's combat operates within a turn-based system, where a character will be afforded a certain amount of actions and movement, and the player will then have to strategize with that economy of action and movement on how to pick off each enemy that they're facing. And there's a bunch of different things that they can use to their advantage to accomplish this. Baldur's Gate 3's combat takes every effort to correlate across the D&D experience. The actions adopted are from D&D, such as things like opportunity attacks, which is turning your back to try and run away from an enemy. It leaves them open to attack you and vice versa. There's things such as rolling advantages and disadvantages, which is being able to use 2 dice when you have an advantage to get a higher score and because you have a particular proficiency or advantage in combat over the enemy. There's different spells and ranged attacks like bows and things like this that you can use, and they all have their different range of which you can cast and shoot your bow to take out the enemy. There is a plethora of different ways to approach combat here, both in ways that you've become familiar with and more you can be rewarded for thinking outside the box. A big example of this is the shove mechanic. So this is something early on that I didn't think too much about, but started to be factored way more into my combat. The shove mechanic allowing you to push an enemy, and based on how big or heavy the enemy is, depends on how far they'll go or if you can shove them at all. But you can roll a dice and have a check for pushing an enemy, and it'll tell you how far you can push them based on how strong you are versus how heavy they are. And there's a lot of different ways where you can kind of set up plays to push an enemy into a set of lava or push them off a cliff. And in doing so, you won't be able to get their loot, but it's an easy one-shot kill to take out an enemy if you push them into something that's potentially lethal. Whilst this form of combat may sound daunting to a lot of different players, and it does come with a steep-ish learning curve for some who may not be well versed in this genre, it is also very comprehensive, providing a multitude of visual cues. So for that shove example, it shows you a little line of where they'll fall, or for when you're firing or casting a spell, you'll see the range at which you can target the enemy. It'll give you a percentage of what the likelihood is to hit and things like this. So once you have the idea of what you're doing, the game offers a lot of different visuals to give you an idea of where you'll be, what will happen, and how this will play out before you click the button to say, yep, let's do that. And I think the more you get familiar with it, the more you'll be able to take chances and experiment, because the game is really good at helping you get a feel and holding your hand with understanding the core mechanics, but not holding your hand and it makes you feel satisfied and feel like you did it all yourself, but it's given you these foundations and a clear understanding of how each of these systems work. And man, Baldur's Gate's systems have so much depth, but are so comprehensive, and there is a lot to dive into here with those systems. But to put this all simply, I think one of the biggest takeaways here when thinking about Baldur's Gate, particularly its combat, is how it encourages the player to think outside the box, think more tactically, and in turn rewards the player for many of those efforts. There has been countless videos and things that have surfaced online with people just discovering neat little tricks of how reactive this world is and ways to think outside the box. An example that I think of this is I saw someone throw a potion on the floor, and because the potion breaks, it has a reaction and it heals the teammates around them. You could just go into the menu and heal, but if you want to have a broader effect, you could actually throw it at the ground near the teammate, and that would break and have a causative effect, healing the teammate that way and not taking up that person's turn. There's a lot of different little things you don't think of that matter, that can open up so much strategy, and it's like you're playing 5D chess when you are actually in the thick of it and thinking outside the box and understand the core principles of how this game works. Larian have accounted for so many things in the gameplay aspect of this game too, that everything feels like it has a reaction. Everything feels like there is something clicking into place, and it just makes you want to continuously experiment with many of its ideas. I feel like the combat becomes extremely flexible too, with how the player can use the environment as well to their advantage. As I mentioned before, shoving enemies off a cliff, also the ability to stand on top of a different ledge or a box and have an advantage on enemies because you have a height advantage. There is many different methods. There's also the stealthy approach as well, where you can approach an enemy without them knowing you're there, or within, and it'll show you a visible cone of where their vision is. You can take them by surprise and just attack them that way. There is a limitless number of ways to approach combat, and it's a ton of fun, and there is so many different ways to cheese the game that feels so fun and make the game so dynamic and engaging to play. Throughout this whole 100-hour experience, you will still be evolving your combat even through multiple playthroughs, and I think that's the beauty of playing the game a second time around, is understanding everything you've learnt and then taking that early on and trying to see how you can adapt and change different outcomes and different combat encounters based on your learnings. So now we'll be diving into what I would say is the crux of this review, one of the more extensive parts that articulate what goes into Baldur's Gate under the hood, many of the inner workings, the systemic systems that make many of these things interlock, and the world so reactive, extensive, and limitless in what it allows the player to do, and those cause and effects of those actions. So in an interview that Todd Kenrick from D&D had with Baldur's Gate 3's director, Sven Winkel, he mentioned that there was a certain approach towards the inclusion of features that Larian had been taking towards Baldur's Gate 3. Sven said that this approach stems from a point of reflection from Larian's previous games. He mentioned that in the last games, like prior stuff like Divine Divinity and stuff like that, and even DOS 2, that they had included features but didn't go all in on those features, leaving some of them to feel a little half done or incomplete in a sense, that fell short of the potential that they could have been. So here with Baldur's Gate 3, they took the approach of saying, well, if we put a feature in this game, it should work across the board in every situation where it's applicable. It should make sense. And a great example of this is the animal speaking skill. So in Baldur's Gate 3, there is a spell where you can cast on yourself the ability to speak to animals. And if you cast this spell, you can't just speak to one animal, you can speak to all animals. And it's this type of logic and this type of understanding that the game forms with the player early on that is consistent across the board with many of its different spells, abilities, and mechanics that makes this game feel consistent with the rules and laws of the game that they have set up. It's important to detail this because what I find so fascinating about Baldur's Gate 3 is how many different spells, items, and objects the game has, and the systemic effect that these different types of interactions have on the broader world. From what I've mentioned earlier, the story's emphasis on choice through dialogue options is very much apparent, but it isn't just this alone that impacts the world. The player can use spells to teleport, or a spell to talk to the dead and interrogate them, befriend different animals, or turn invisible to sneak through an area. These are all different methods that can lead to different outcomes for particular quests, storylines, or progressing the main story. Much like how I talked about shoving earlier, the player is able to move and throw particular items, almost any item really, depending on how strong they are, and that's dictated by their strength statistic. This makes interacting with the world so much more fascinating because you can use what's called an improvised throw to throw just random items or even just people at another person. And it's just a different way of elevating both combat and also stacking items to get to a hard to reach place. It's not all just a matter of whether whether or not you have spells, but if you're a strong barbarian, you can also just pick things up and move them to make your own path. And I think it's this level of flexibility with the systems that have been built here that allow the player to critically think and never really do feel like they gate you out of content if you have the right mindset. There is so much here. You can throw items like a potion on the floor to heal your teammates, as I mentioned earlier. There is a level of cause and effect, but what I think diving more into that makes this so fascinating is that it enables the player to think analytically as to what statistically or position-wise and tactically is the best solution, but also get creative with it at the same time. And in this regard, I think Baldur's Gate's combat and interactions with the world and these systemic systems really do bring the world to life in a way that is nothing short of a stroke of genius. It makes things like completing a quest or figuring out a puzzle not feel like you're doing it the right way, but one of the multiple possible right ways. It allows a level of flexibility that rewards creative thinking and experimentation. It's interesting to me because I wrote out a bullet point for this review script and it dawned on me, hey, you said the same thing about Tears of the Kingdom, yet Baldur's Gate and Tears are two very different experiences. And at this moment, it really did click in my mind what makes Baldur's Gate truly a masterfully crafted RPG and video game. It's how it takes this concept of curiosity that extends into every choice you make or every action you do. Where Zelda's curiosity and creativity shines through the sense of discovery, I would say Baldur's Gate shines through the cause and effect that leaves you thinking, how will this shape the outcomes of my journey? Or how will this play out if I do this thing? If I was to, shoot down the chandelier right now, how would the cause and effect of that action change this storyline or the broader storyline? If I was to throw this thing or do this way and go that path, where would I end up and how big of an impact would that have? And hey, I wonder if I do this thing, will that aid me in battle? Will this have a good or negative outcome just depending on how I think? And it's this level of critical thinking that the game is always throwing at you, but also allowing you to experiment and be creative that I think blends two things that sound like they're polar opposites together in such a nice way. There is an infinite suite of possibilities in Baldur's Gate, and it feels like that is what truly makes it such a monolith of an RPG. You'll never feel like you are running out of ways to approach situations, and you'll never feel like you're out of choices when you're playing this game, even on the multiple playthroughs. Many spells and proficiencies make you want to leverage your skills in the best way possible too, and they make you want to challenge yourself to look and uncover many of the mysteries in the world. For example, spells that enable you to talk to animals, or spells that allow you to talk to the dead, that you can use to open up a set of options that even provide context to a situation or solve a puzzle. But they're not the only way to do this, and these abilities, if they're not available, are just one mechanism that could solve that puzzle. There are many others too. There are many things in Baldur's Gate's world that really do make the player remain inquisitive and allow you and ask you to really just think, how would I solve this? And think logically in a real world kind of setting in this game, and usually you end up feeling rewarded for the things that you've picked. I would also like to touch on the amount of skill progression in Baldur's Gate 3, as this game has level, loot, and all the typical RPG elements that you'd think when progressing your character. What I like about the progression in Baldur's Gate is how it directly ties to your character to help improve the gameplay mechanics. Things like armor and items, they do increase things like your armor class and different proficiencies and come with skills and perks and stat increases, but they come with spells too. Things like this that will allow you to do additional things. Like, as I mentioned earlier, the spells like animal talking or talking to the dead, for example, if your character doesn't have that because they're not like a magic, necromancer or something, or they're not some magic-based character, you could find a necklace with that skill and you could give that to your very melee-oriented character who will be able to hone in on those skills. There are so many different ways to tailor these characters too and teach them what you want them to know and mold them to be the type of character you want to roleplay as. There is a lot of other things too, like as I mentioned earlier with the having amount of actions and movements, there's different types of armor and items that will allow you to have more movement, more items, like more actions in battle and enable you to think and strategize as to who you want to have more actions during combat. This level of progression is so interesting because it doesn't feel very arbitrary like you're progressing a level bar just to get, I do 2+ more damage now, and I am able to like equip a legendary sword. There's a lot more to it, and I think it really does it's based on D&D, so it takes a lot of those foundations, but I think Larian have tactfully done it in a video game format that makes this element of the game feel so fantastic. And they've added so many other things to the combat experience that makes this game just overall feel so great, and the exploration feels so fantastical. You always feel like you're rewarded for your investments, and it makes you just want to move forward with the character you've created and just trust the dice and trust the experience, because there is always an avenue if you look hard enough. And I think that to sum this whole section up, Baldur's Gate systemic systems and these underlining mechanisms that make this game so reactive are something that will hold this game up to this high standard that everyone has been talking about, and this is in large part what makes it the game of the year for many people, and will be a game that's talked about for years to come. The next component is one of the most underrated elements of the Baldur's Gate experience that I feel doesn't get as much love or enough love, and that is how seamless and effortless the multiplayer experience is for this game, and just how well put together it is. Baldur's Gate supports both online multiplayer and even couch co-op. Setting up one of these sessions is relatively easy, with online sessions being hosted by one player and allowing other members to join. You'll be able to see party members in your cinematics and their story choices and romance options, and they're all meted and measured throughout the game. There is so many different moments here where you can see the strengths of your friends play out throughout the story, and likewise with you, and you can see each other's stories unfold, and it makes the game just feel like such a fun experience, and it just adds to the level of this being a tabletop experience expressed through a video game, and it really does bring that experience to life here. I think that overall there is something really special here that Larian have been able to create that few studios seldom are able to execute. It isn't new ground for them with Baldur's Gate 3, but it is something that needs to be acknowledged and commended. For me, when I think of playing games with your friends, I generally think of like competitive experiences, looter experiences, or these more bespoke co-op like experiences where you're working together, usually like base building or playing through a story that's designed in that sense, like It Takes Two or something. But a game like this that is so mechanically complex, there is so much depth and systems that we've already discussed at length that would be so easily able to be breakable and fall apart just playing by yourself, but they work in such a large capacity and they fully function, and they are so well put together and operate just as logically when playing with friends as they do when playing by yourself. It is so crazy to me to just imagine that this is actually a fully functioning system that they've been able to get working, and seeing this experience unfold with my friends has been a uniquely different experience to playing this by myself. And I think that that is another aspect of the Baldur's Gate experience that I think is quite engaging. I think that this game can be so good and so finely tuned and packed together when you're just playing by yourself, but it is also a game that can be just as compelling and fun in a multitude of different ways when playing with your friends. Not only is this an absolute technical feat, but this game is just overall a multiplayer banger, and one that if your friends are all looking into playing this, I'd highly recommend checking out and playing together, because this game is one that I think really does lend itself well to that multiplayer experience. And hey, in a lot of ways it even does tap into, at its core, what the experience of playing D&D is like through a gameplay lens. So for this review, I've discussed the element of choice throughout this review in many different areas, whether I'm talking about the various different narrative beats and the impact that it has on the story and choice, or whether it's through combat, through how you can approach combat and the different ways you can take out enemies, to the systems themselves within the open world. And I think that that last one here is very important, because the systems that I was talking about earlier feed into one of the core elements of Baldur's Gate that I think makes this game insanely fun, and that is the questing and exploration. So there are so many quests here, and I feel like a lot of them, you can take them on from the start and they have an impact, but they will have mutations and things that play out, and they will have ever evolving quests that come back into the fold later on in the game and have an update based on the decisions you make. There's a lot of actions and consequences to many of these quests and people that you meet. Some can feel like they're pretty easily accessible too. You can go to big hubs that will populate many of the different acts of this game, but there is a lot of these other quests that will be hidden in plain sight that need to be uncovered, and you won't see them unless you play or interact with the environment, or read many of the different books and things on a shelf. So it really does ask you to look everywhere, read everything if you want to discover everything, and sometimes even then you probably still won't see all this game has to offer. There are some examples here, like one example for me was moving a bookshelf, and I noticed that behind there was a door. I unlocked the shelf and there was a door behind that place, which led me to a hidden base. Another example was moving a portrait to press a button, and it was like it opened up a little hidden alley. There were so many little things like this, and I'm willing to bet that for those 2 that I found, there was another like 10 that I've missed. And that's what's so mind-blowing about this game. To loop back with what I was talking about with these systemic systems and interactable environments, this aspect of Baldur's Gate is so large, and it makes the world itself feel so dense, like everything is tucked away, that there is a dungeon or a labyrinth just hidden behind any wall. It is absolutely mind-blowing. In an interview with PC Gamer, the lead writer for Baldur's Gate 3, Adam Smith, discussed when approaching the quest design and structure for Baldur's Gate 3, the main approaches and considerations that were taken into account. And the main takeaway was that players can enjoy all the offerings of each act and eventually be guided back to the main story, but the big focus point was making sure that they get there at their own pace. Smith mentioned that he didn't want players to feel pushed towards the main story, like it's something that's being directed at them at all times. There's a level of understanding that the team is having fun doing something here, the party is really getting invested in this thing, so let them enjoy it. It's a feeling and a sense of understanding that a DM has to take into account when playing a game of D&D, and similarly, the lead writers and developers at Larian had to take a similar approach with how we experience Baldur's Gate and take on many of its side content and getting lost in its world. They're having fun doing this thing, just let them do it and they'll eventually all be led back to the story in due time. Larian has figured out a way to make the map as well feel incredibly significant, not due to its landmass but more in forms of its density, traveling from location to location. So many little things like buttons, levers, hidden behind a crate, and portraits that'll send you down interesting paths and unlock exciting quests and some fun discoveries. It really is such a large and varied map to explore for each of its particular locations that the game takes you through. And it's not even the pursuit of completing and finding quests that makes this game world so fun to explore. It's the sense of wonder and curiosity of what you'll discover, whether it's 2 ogres doing the sideways dance or stumbling upon a well that you could randomly descend into. There is just a lot of different things here that make this experience wholly unique and fun and just fascinating, and no 2 playthroughs will ever feel truly the same. The Act 1 experience for most people will feel like the most extensive way to chart out the map, and you'll feel like after 20 hours you'll feel like, yeah, I think I've seen everything now, I think I'm ready to move on, I think I'm done here. Only to chat to a friend or do another playthrough with your mates and who pull some lever somewhere and you're like, wait, this is a whole other area, there's people here, there's quests, I haven't seen everything. It was all a lie. And then you'll start wondering just how much of this world did you actually uncover? And it's the incredible part of the experience. It's actually crazy to say, but missing out on content or something in the game and only realizing it exists on a subsequent playthrough is something that I've really just feel like is a testament to how beautifully crafted this experience is. There's something really great about not seeing everything in one playthrough that encourages this level of replayability that makes the game feel like it's going to be fresh in the future when you go back again. So now I want to dive into the visuals, sound, and performance for Baldur's Gate, starting with the performance, which is pretty solid. I was running a consistent 60 FPS on my 2080 Ti, and when I played it portably, the game also ran like a gem as well. However, once I hit Act 3, I noticed some issues with buildings taking a while to fully spawn in and render. There was this interesting kind of like issue that would occur where I would see, like for like a 2-story building, I'd see the floors for each of the different levels, but I wouldn't be able to actually see the walls or any of the exterior render. So it was a bit like, it would take a bit of time, become a bit disruptive, especially when traversing the later sections of the game. It did become a little disruptive. Another thing that I noticed as well was some like armor and clothes, like the textures on those clothes did take some time to spawn in and fully like render and fully detail, which was a bit of a frustrating issue and a little disruptive, but nothing really too bad or that really broke the experience. Overall, I think it is something that's come about with patch 4 from what I've gathered. I've noticed people starting to document that this issue was occurring around then, and even with the patch 5 update now, it still has been occurring for me. Another really distracting issue that I encountered that was a bit of a visual bug in the final act was I noticed that 2 different NPCs had their jaws that would stretch insanely wide like they were Luffy or something. It was like if you highlighted them, you'd see this like yellow line that is like their character's outline for when you hover over them, and this jaw would just be stretched like to the ends of the map. It was a bit of a funny one, but outside of that, the bugs were like here and there and like not really super game breaking or anything like that, just a few little visual uplifts and issues that occurred, which will be patched with time. So overall, the game runs pretty well, and if there is any issues, whether it's frame rate or visual issues, it will take place more than likely in the 3rd act, but most of these things can be avoided, or they're just visual bugs. So moving on now to the soundtrack and performances. So the OST, man, I need to kick it off with that. This is an absolute banger of a soundtrack. Ever since I finished the game, I've just been putting on different random tracks to listen to here and there, especially when writing this review, because it was extremely helpful. And man, some of the battle themes in this game, man, they create an actual rush that makes you feel like you're leading the charge in some epic fantasy, which I guess in some senses you are. The different musical composition of the soundtrack is absolutely astounding. The reoccurring motif of the riff from the central theme of the game, which is that down by the river, slipping itself into many tracks, the more epic and triumphant pieces that play in combat, and the sound of these tracks hitting a high when you slay an enemy, it really does make these encounters, particularly the boss encounters, feel like a spectacle to experience when everything is firing off. Speaking of boss encounters, a few particular meetings go off with music that is absolutely phenomenal. The composer Borislav Salvov has absolutely killed it here, producing one of the year's best soundtracks easily. Now I'd like to move over to the performances from the various actors who perform some of the most influential and captivating performances of the year. Seriously, I discussed earlier how insane and brilliant the writing is for this game, but that goes hand in hand with how incredible the performances of many of these different companions are, and not to mention many of the side characters and, more importantly, the antagonists too. But the companions will be the main focus of what I'll be talking about, because they're the characters that you spend the most of your time with, and they're incredibly compelling. Every one of these performances from these main characters was incredible, with 2 highlights for me being Neil Newbon's performance as Astarion, which he absolutely deserved that Best Performance of the Year award for, and it was extremely well earned, and Jennifer English's role as Shadowheart. These 2 characters in particular had powerful narratives that can go several different ways story-wise that invoke a plethora of emotions, and I feel like these actors absolutely nailed their role and are those characters to me. They did an incredible job, but it's not just them. There are so many different roles here that I really enjoyed. I loved Samantha Behart's performance as Karlach. She brought an energetic F-bomb dropping legend to life, and I always loved having Karlach in my party. She was an incredible character. The performances in this game never failed to bring these characters to life, and I'm eager to replay this game and see many more of these companions at the forefront. There's like, you know, a playthrough that I want to do where I really want to have Lae'zel in my party more, and I want to see a bit more of Will and Gale, because I feel like my party didn't have enough of them. I did have them in there at times, but not enough to really just get to know them and see how they responded to particular situations. This is one other aspect that I feel like offers a lot of replay value, seeing all your different characters respond to a situation that they weren't there for the first time around. And I just think these characters are all so damn compelling. And even the other later companions and characters that you meet along the way and people that will come about on your journeys are all just very rich in the types of stories being told. But it's not just your companions, it's the side characters and, more importantly, the villains. They have such a strong performance in this game. There is so many different characters here, and I didn't think I'd be saying this, but Spider-Man wasn't the only game to get a performance from J.J. Simmons this year. I think the writing for this game is phenomenal, but like I said, it goes hand in hand with how well executed these performances are, and like, hats off to everyone. They absolutely smashed it and are a large part of what makes this game so phenomenal. So now I just want to talk about why I feel a game like Baldur's Gate 3 is a big deal and really special. It's seldom that a game can go from early access of 3 years to an overnight phenomenon like Baldur's Gate did. There is so many factors that make this the high caliber game that it is, and a special one at that. You can see from the game's first act alone that this game was iterated on and fleshed out to an insane degree to meet much of the feedback that was echoed over the years from its community. And the community that Larian has fostered over these years before its launch has helped refine and shape this game into the gem that it is. Larian also have taken a lot of feedback and learnings from the culminations of many of their other works to help make this game as much of a crowning achievement as it is. It is really rare to see a game that feels like it is niche in a sense that Baldur's Gate is, where it caters to a D&D community, but at the same time feels so comprehensive and so accessible for newcomers who have never touched D&D in their life, or likewise aren't really into turn-based games or RPGs. This feels like a game that doesn't compromise for its mass appeal, but more pulls people in with what it is. And what is Baldur's Gate? Well, Baldur's Gate is an interactive RPG that does play into its choice really heavily. It's a game that has an open sandbox that allows you to use objects and items and anything to your liking in a manner that creates a system of action and reaction that can make you want to question how you'll approach many different situations. There is just an unlimited wealth of ways to tackle this game and things to do. It's not hard to see why this game is so well regarded, and it is a game that has set a bar for what RPGs can be. Sven Vickel, in an interview for Baldur's Gate 3, said the goal was to make a cinematic AAA experience that can draw in a new audience that is usually put off by the steep learning curves of RPGs and D&D. Ditching that baggage and making a more accessible experience that doesn't compromise the level of depth that these games tend to offer. And as I've said, they have accomplished this in spades, and it's easy to see why they've succeeded here, providing an experience that can be enjoyed solo, with friends, with people that are D&D veterans, to novices that have never touched an RPG or D&D in their life. There is a full level of depth and complexity here that anyone, regardless of their prior experience, can enjoy. And I think that that is half the beauty of what makes Baldur's Gate 3 so special. This game doesn't compromise on its depth and complexity, but allows people to get there at their own pace and is welcoming to all different types of players. And I've really been thinking about this a lot recently. I love RPGs, and to me, Baldur's Gate 3 was a special and rare experience because it reminded me what I love about these types of games. There has been a lot of discourse this year surrounding many other RPGs, whether some have become stagnant or stuck in their ways with different types of patterns and things that they use to make their games. And I think that this type of pattern and stagnation isn't from a sense of laziness that a lot of people who get aggressive like to say, but more from making a game accessible so a lot of people can enjoy these games. And I think that one thing that I really like about Baldur's Gate 3, and I think shows to a lot of other people in the industry, is that games don't need to be accessible to a fault where the games are so simple and let you have everything in one playthrough. You can miss out on things, you can be locked out of stuff and punished for mistakes, but you can still survive and have a great time, and people will still love and enjoy the game if it is designed and crafted in a way that respects the player and gives them another avenue to work towards. I think Baldur's Gate 3 is a beautiful game because you will make mistakes, you won't get the perfect roll, the perfect outcome every single time, and I think letting the dice take control and letting the journey just take you to the outcome is half of the joy and beauty. This is what makes Baldur's Gate 3 so special, is it shows that a game can be both welcoming and accessible, but not accessible to a fault where a game has to give the player and continuously reward them. The failures, the mistakes, the successes, all of it is a part of the journey and what defines your experience in Baldur's Gate, and I absolutely love this game for it. To bring this video to a close, Baldur's Gate 3 is a monumental feat for gaming. It tells many tales, one of a game that cleverly brings the world of Dungeons and Dragons to life through a game that exposes the iconic tabletop to a much broader audience in a comprehensive manner. It also tells the story of a genre such as the CRPG that is also being brought to a much larger audience, reinvigorating a genre that has over recent years become something that's felt rather daunting and complex for the average gamer to jump into. But outside of all of these influences and impacts that Baldur's Gate has had, it simply is a marvel of a video game. It is something that you can truly get lost in, and one that will continue to surprise you whether you experience the game as one of the origin characters, the more famous approach, the custom character, or playing as the Dark Urge. It is crazy that even after launch, then the massive success, and even winning Game of the Year, Larian is still adding free updates, improvements, and new content to this game, and responding to feedback and trying to make this game truly as much as a shining gem as possible. They're really just trying to work to make this game even better on top of how good it already is. It truly is a game that comes once a generation. It is a game that pushes the bounds of what this genre can be, and for a genre as robust and expansive and full of mechanical systems and depth like an RPG, that is no easy feat for them to have accomplished, and they truly have here with this game. It is an innovator and something that will set the bar for what an RPG can be for the years to come. Whether you're playing alone or with friends, this is simply a masterpiece of an experience, and one that I strongly recommend on any occasion, because Baldur's Gate is a game that you will never forget. And there's nothing like your first time, but it will be a game you'll come back to for many years to come. I love this game, and it has earned all the accolades and success that it has garnered, and it has earned a special place in my heart. Thank you for watching, and keep an eye out for the upcoming videos I'll be making, particularly one I'm hoping to have out by the end of the year, where I cover my top 10 favorite games for this year. Take care, enjoy the holiday season, and I'll see you in the next video. Catch you later.